So, Mike, there's a dispute now between Apple and the FBI. You know James Comey. You know the folks on all sides.
Actually, know Tim Cook too.
There you go. And so, it seems to be a dispute in some way between the national security establishment and the tech establishment. But Bill Gates has sort of said that Apple should be more cooperative, and you, one of the great national security leaders of our country, have sort of backed Apple. What's happening here?
Training Apple, yeah. Look, Mark, there's probably a constitutional question here, but I'm not a constitutional lawyer. There's clearly a privacy security balancing thing here, and I'll let wise people think about that. I just look at this in the security lane, and frankly, given the variety of threats that America faces, one needs to be careful that in dealing with this threat over here, we don't make it more difficult to deal with that threat over here. And so I think we need to be careful about what the government's asking Apple to do, because if you believe Apple and frankly a whole bunch of other technologists, even done well, dual key under lock, court order, and so on, even done well, you have actually opened up greater possibilities for degrading what would otherwise be almost unbreakable end-to-end encryption. And Jim Clapper, for the last, 2 or 3 years in his worldwide threat briefing, the director of national intelligence has said the number one threat facing America is the cyber threat. And so I would ask the government, frankly, being a security guy, I think the government has the right to demand this. I just don't know that it's a wise thing for the government to demand it. And now, if you want me to make, I've kind of teed up the issue as to why we need to be careful. If you want me to make a judgment, my judgment is that we're probably better served by not punching any holes into a strong encryption system, even well-guarded holes.
Okay, so, but this is a challenge that we have in the high-tech world. So, for example, if I have a home, I can lock the door to my house. I can put the most high-tech security system into my home. But when the government comes with a lawful warrant and says that you have to let us in, I have to let you in. I have to disable the system and all the rest. And if I had, basically what it sounds like is the tech companies are building technology that will blow up my home if you try and come in.
Yeah, but actually in this case, you're asking the tech companies to build a key that opens 320 million houses.
Interesting. So,
and that's really the deal. Look, when this all began, Mark, I said, I know this is bad. I'm not sure if this leads to that. But the longer I've thought about it, I'm trending that this does lead to that. And the metaphor you raised is actually the right one. That this key isn't just to my house. This key opens everybody's house.
So does the national security establishment, we know how important getting content has been for national security. Is content going to be out of our reach from now on?
Content will be more out of our reach no matter what we do in this case. This is just an inevitable advance of technology. By the way, you play this out 2 and 3 moves down the board, right? We could have a really bad outcome. What if you compel U.S. companies to do this? And we drive the highest end encryption on the planet offshore. I mean, if you look, Apple's actually been cooperative in all of the other things with regard to the phone. All of what I call the digital exhaust that these folks have been putting out, that was available to Apple, and they shared it with the government. It was available to them because they used an Apple product. All right, they were in the Apple system. Now, if we make Apple do this and offshore companies don't, we will drive the international market to the offshore companies, and we will now not only not get content, we won't get digital exhaust either. And my point is, there's a lot of digital exhaust out there. Mike McConnell, one of my predecessors at NSA, actually lived through this movie. It was called Clipper Chip. And Mike wanted to bake in the back door actually into the silicon. And the Clinton administration would have none of it. And Mike then tells the tale. Thus began the greatest 15 years in the history of electronic surveillance.
Wow. Because
everyone going to digital devices created this ocean of data, much of it meta as opposed to content. But with metadata, you can do an awful lot. So, sorry, to specifically answer your question, under any circumstances, we're going to get less content. It doesn't mean we're going to get less intelligence.
Interesting. So we have to fight the war on terror on the fumes.
Well, yeah, on the stuff surrounding the data. I mean, if you go into this domain, digital exhaust is the best phrase I can think of. You can't avoid it.
Yeah.
If that engine is pumping, there's exhaust. You might not get what's inside, but you're able to learn an awful lot.
It's like an infrared picture. You can see the outline, you can see the heat element, but you can't tell who it is.
And you can
necessarily.
learn a lot.
You can learn a lot. Interesting. Is there a wall right now between the FBI and the NSA? Could the FBI give this terrorist phone to the NSA to hack?
Well, first of all, I'm not in government, so I don't know what's been done.
Mm-hmm.
I know of no legal impediment that would prevent the Bureau to ask the agency to do this on its behalf using the Bureau's authorities rather than the agency's authorities. So I know of no impediment to that kind of cooperation.
And does the agency have, I've always heard that, we hear about literally unbreakable encryption.
Yeah.
Is that a phrase that's accepted by the NSA?
Well, all encryption is breakable. It's just a matter of time. And unfortunately, some of it's so good that time is measured in decades, not minutes. All right? And so I'm not surprised. I would not be surprised if the Bureau has asked the agency and the agency says, we can't deal with that. I mean, Apple is a big, powerful, technologically advanced enterprise.
Yeah.
They're good.
Interesting. So let's shift topics. I mean, let's talk about the terrorist threat. Yeah. You spent a large chunk of your career keeping the American people safe from this threat. And you were there in the intelligence community, as you've mentioned in your new book, on September 11, 2001. So before September 11, 2001, we faced primarily a danger from one terrorist network, which had safe haven in one country. Right. Today we face danger from multiple terrorist networks. You have Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and then all the Al-Qaeda affiliates, AQIM, in the Islamic Maghreb, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, multiple networks with safe haven in more than a half dozen countries. Yeah. Are we in a greater threat environment today than we were before 9/11?
I don't say that, and here's how I draw the graph and the ether between us, Mark. If this is where we were on September 10th, and unfortunately we weren't quite aware we were there, all right, the actions of two administrations has pushed that threat level down, and it was getting better and better and better till about 2011. And then that line nosed up again and is starting to increase. I do not think it has yet gotten back to the level of September 10th. But we are unarguably less safe than we were 1, 2, 3, or 4 years ago. But the threat has also metastasized. Oh yeah, no, it's a different kind of threat.
So it's like you were dealing with a cancer in a specific location and trying to stop it from coming back. Now we have metastasized cancers all over the place that are causing.
I would agree, and to extend the analogy, just one more revolution, and all analogies break down eventually.
Of course, yes.
The one more revolution is that was a life-threatening cancer right next to a vital organ. Now it's metastasized, as you've said, but individually, even collectively, it is not yet quite as life-threatening as that September 10th one was.
Now we have, though, a unique situation in the history of Islamic radicalism, short as it is, modern Islamic radicalism, which is that you have free market competition between two competing entities. It's like you have Apple and Microsoft competing.
No, actually, what you've got is Apple and Xerox.
Okay,
fair enough. You've got that mature, somewhat bureaucratic, fairly slow-moving Al-Qaeda, and now you got this damn startup over here that's acting like a Silicon Valley startup.
That's a really interesting analogy. But you have this competition going on, and so they're with the coin of the realm for they're fighting for the hearts and minds of the jihadi faithful. They're fighting for the money from the jihadi funders around the world. And so how do you win that competition for who signs up with you, who gives you money, things like that? You attack us, right?
No, and Mark, your question also reveals another great truth. We argue with ourselves about if we do X or Y or Z, we're just feeding the narrative. Guantanamo, it's a recruitment poster. Targeted killings, you're filling in the B-roll for the recruitment video and so on. You want to pump up terrorist recruiting? You want people flocking to the black banners? You have one big deal successful terrorist attack against the United States.
Amen.
All right? And so that truth you just pointed out applies not just to the competition between groups, They want to score. But it also applies to the logic of why we need to do some of the things we do. And the argument that some of the things we do helps recruitment may or may not be true. But if you really want to help recruitment, you fail.
So aren't we in this terrible vicious cycle where the intelligence community before 9/11 was criticized for not doing enough to stop 9/11, and so they turn around and they start the CIA interrogation program. We have the NSA's activities. We do all these things, and at the time, in the wake of 9/11, they're incredibly popular, and people among those who know them. And then they're so successful that they prevent another attack that people start feeling complacent again, and then they start criticizing the NSA, and so now we have to scale back some of these programs, and then what's going to happen? We're going to get hit again, and it's going to the cycle starts again.
You're right. There's a natural, predictable rhythm. We all knew this when we were doing "Playing to the Edge," as the title of my book suggests. When we were doing that. 01, 02, 03, 04, we knew the pendulum would come swinging back. I mean, the existential whine that we have in the intelligence community is that political elites, not most Americans, but political elites, feel free to criticize us for not doing enough when they feel in danger, and then immediately criticize us for doing too much once we've made them feel safe again.
Yeah. So you just recently forced Donald Trump to do something he almost never does, which is backtrack. So he announced that he's no longer for going beyond waterboarding.
He's taking the war crimes plank out of the platform. Yeah.
But I mean, so we both know, you know, the people who ran the program. No one tortured anybody in the United States government, but we did use some techniques that were necessary in order to get people to talk. And so there's an element of, I think every Republican candidate has said that they would bring back some form of interrogation.
Right.
I mean, are we in danger now because we're no longer capturing and interrogating terrorists?
And frankly, the primal problem is the one you just suggested. It's not so much what we do after we capture them. It's we don't capture. All right, we don't. I mean, I got more fingers up in the air here, Mark, than we've actually captured people outside of internationally recognized theaters of conflict that we have not put into an Article III court. And by the way, putting someone into an Article III court is a very high bar. And frankly, having that as your criteria, the only standard under which you will capture and detain someone is illogical. I mean, you've got this president, like his predecessor, saying we're at war with al-Qaeda. Based on the fact we're at war, he feels he has the right to kill people, including American citizens. Right? And yet, powerful illogic is I can't capture and hold them unless I've got a criminal charge against them. I can't capture and hold them under the laws of armed conflict. I mean, it just boggles the mind as to why you demand A, but somehow reject B. Now, once we've got them in our custody, there are a variety of techniques that you can use, all of them lawful, and I would simply hope that any administration is what's the right word, comfortable, confident enough to go ahead and, as the circumstances dictate, use all the tools available to get information that would save lives.
Now, don't we have a problem, though, because the Republican Congress just codified Obama's executive order requiring the Army Field Manual?
They did. They did. And, one of the reasons, Mark, that I kept the CIA program, recall in the summer of 06, what are we going to do? And I tell the story that I could have walked away from it. I just said, no, that was then, this is now, we're not doing it anymore. I did say that was then, this is now, but we need to continue to do at least some of this because I wanted to keep the options open for the president. One of the arguments I had in my mind, Mark, for the reasons I had to keep some of this was what you just said, that the Department of Defense was hunkering down with a rewrite of the Army Field Manual, which was far more conservative in terms of interrogation techniques than the manual that it replaced. It was totally unclassified. It didn't have a classified annex like the manual it replaced. And look, I understand why America's Army did that. They were trying to recover some lost prestige after the genuine abuses of Abu Ghraib. But it is an incredibly conservative manual. And I make the argument, I made it then and I'll make it now, Mark. No one could claim that manual exhausts the inventory of lawful interrogation techniques.
Sure.
And so I would not have recommended to codify in law something that prior to that the president still had the option to change.
Absolutely. Let's talk quickly about Afghanistan. So the Obama administration recently announced with great fanfare that they had destroyed a major al-Qaeda training camp in Afghanistan, which sounds like good news, except for one problem. There were no major al-Qaeda training camps in Afghanistan when they came to office. So we see al-Qaeda making a comeback in the land where they launched 9/11. ISIS is moving in. There was a story in the Washington Post recently that ISIS is coming in and they're treating people so brutally that people actually long for the rule of the Taliban. And Taliban is making a comeback. And this is all as a result of the U.S. withdrawal or drawdown. Is Afghanistan going to become the next Iraq?
The administration, I think, saw a little bit of the handwriting on the wall. Certainly their game plan for both places was based upon electoral promises and the electoral calendar in North America, not on any Southwest or Central Asian ground realities. All right? And so we had this drive to zero in Iraq, and I don't think any sentient human being now could think that the right number of residual American forces in Iraq was zero, given what's happened there. The administration has gone to school a bit on it, but it still had this internal conflict, Mark, where you've got this electoral promise push to get as close to zero as possible. But now the reality is such on the ground that I think even the administration recognizes zero is not the right number. That said, the earlier withdrawals were not conditions-based. They were calendar-based, and we're now living with the consequences of that decision process.
We talk about cycles, but it seems like Afghanistan, we're now in the third repeat of a cycle. So, I mean, we had the Reagan administration, helped the Mujahideen fight, drive the Soviets out. As soon as the Soviets were gone,
one and done.
One and done. This is not our problem anymore, and they let it happen. They let Afghanistan fall apart, and the result was 9/11 and Al Qaeda coming in 9/11, and now we're repeating history again. We're drawing down and
I think
let
so.
them come back in.
No, the counter argument is the forever war argument. Can we do this forever? It depends on what you mean by this. All right. I mean, you've bought things with blood and treasure. You really don't want to easily give them up. Hussein Haqqani, the former Pakistani ambassador to the United States, actually a good friend of America, and actually a very, very knowledgeable guy. He had a great phrase at Aspen a year or two ago, Mark. He said, you Americans don't lose wars. You just lose interest.
That's a good phrase. So closing question. So during the 1988 presidential campaign, no one asked George H.W. Bush about Iraq. And on his watch, the Persian Gulf War happened.
Right.
During the 2000 campaign, nobody asked George W. Bush about al-Qaeda. And, of course, the 9/11 happened and all that resulted. We're now in the middle of a presidential campaign. What is the one intelligence or national security challenge that we face that nobody is talking about or thinking about right now?
Wow. Here's how I slice and dice it, all right? The thing you got to worry about overnight is terrorism and cybercrime. The thing you got to worry about 3 to 5 years out is a group of countries, Mark, identify as ambitious, fragile, and nuclear. North Korea, Pakistan, Iran, and even Russia. And then way out here on the end, you still got time. But the one that's really a big deal is how do you accommodate, in a peaceful way, the rise of China. And so that's kind of my menu. I guess I would tell a candidate, don't get over-focused on the near term. Look at those mid and long-term issues and begin to shape your policies to deal with those. If you're looking for something that's going to go bump in the night, the combination of likelihood and, that's really bad, all right, where those lines cross. The Chinese have identified the South China Sea as a core interest, and they're acting that way. We Americans, as part of our DNA, believe freedom of navigation is a core interest. This is core interest v. core interest. This one could go bump and be bad.
Wow. All right. Well, thank you, Mike, for your time today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.